Defend the castle, kill the king, save the nation. Sounds easy, huh? Does it? Yeah, I don't know what all the fuss is about, really. Hello and welcome to the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter, and today we are going to be looking at the 2011 release, Ironclad, and it's directed by Jonathan English. Now, I don't quite know how this film came onto my radar, but it did. I think it's because I was browsing online and I was looking at fantasy films, and this cover just kept popping up. And also, a friend of mine, he claimed that they did some filming nearby where he lives. I've checked that out. I don't think that's right. Anyway, let's find out exactly what Ironclad is all about. Ironclad. Sounds quite a brutal name, doesn't it? And brutal title. Well, it certainly lives up to that. Just to let you know straight out the bat, it is very, very bloody. It's very gory. If you like violence, you will like this film. Pretty much. I'm pretty much sure of that. I'm a bit squeamish with the violence, so I had to kind of do that for quite a lot of the film. Anyway, what is it all about? Well, Ironclad is actually set around about 1215. They do a little montage at the beginning, and it's all about King John. He's a very unpopular king of England at the time, and he was quite a despot. He was quite a dictator, and he basically just ruled with will and force, as opposed to kind of, taking other people's opinions into consideration. He was a brutal man, and he kind of did what he wanted. And that caused a problem for the barons. The barons who supported the king, well, they were being taxed because King John wanted to reclaim his ancestral, I think that's how you say it, ancestral land back in France. He thought that, because his ancestors owned the land in France, that he would take it back again. And of course, war means money, and money means taxing the barons. Well, they had had enough, so they rose up and they fought King John. There was quite a rebellious group, and that actually came to a head when the Magna Carta was drafted by the Arch-Bishop of Canterbury. And that piece of paper, that document, that treaty was meant to be a peace treaty between the king and his barons, the rebellious ones. Well, it kind of worked. Unfortunately, neither side really stuck to it. The barons, after the Magna Carta was signed, they still kept their troops and their forces at full strength. And the king, well, he went out for a bit of revenge. He decided that all the barons that signed this Magna Carta would actually, they needed to be punished. So he started a story of revenge, basically. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Magna Carta is actually one of the first documents in English history that started to give liberty to men and women. But it was kind of all free men, and at the time there was still serfs that were bound to the barons, and then there was slaves, in effect. There was unpaid labour, and the Magna Carta didn't really didn't apply to those. It was just the free men of England. But it was a start, and you can understand why the king, well, he wasn't very happy about it. All of that basically is the montage. So that's the setup. And then you get into the film. The film's about an hour and 50 minutes. And I'll just say it again, of quite bloody violence. There's limbs being chopped off. There's arrows going in people's eyes. And because we are in the technology age of good CGI, it looks really, really realistic. There are some themes that run through this, and one of them, as I say, is the rebellious nature of why people rebel. What pushes a man or woman to rebel? They can take so much and then they snap. So you've got that aspect of it. And obviously you've got the monarchy side, and that then brings up the theme of rules and codes of conduct, and what codes of conduct should we live by? Just because I want to live by one set of codes and rules doesn't necessarily mean that someone else does. And then, well, who should prevail? And what you kind of learn is that, well, it's basically who's got the stronger army. And in this case, to begin with, it was King John, and he actually he pays mercenaries to come over from Denmark. I think they're Danish. And so he's bolstering his army. So at the time of the Magna Carta, he's seen as a little bit weak in terms of strength, but then he just pays mercenaries to come over. And therefore, it's like, it's all about will. It's all about that king's will over someone else's will. And that's a really interesting concept about how we've got to where we've got to, especially nowadays where, in England it's a democracy. But of course, there's still a set of rules that we are supposedly have all agreed to. But then as you grow older, you kind of think, well, did I agree to that? I don't really know. So, it's like, and then when you start looking at the whole fabric of what society is and how it's made up, I don't know, I'm just starting to think, it just comes down to who has the most power, the most strength. And if you look at it nowadays, you've got the police, and the government have the police, and then the army. So again, it's all about strength and power. It also focuses on justice as well, and it's justice for people, for the free man and woman, because you can't have a system that really does keep putting those people down, because eventually they'll snap. So it looks at justice and what justice is. It then looks at when you have a rebellion, revenge. Revenge can take place. And then, so revenge then can, beget revenge. So if, revenge takes place for something that's happened, well, then that person that's had that revenge taken against, does that make sense? They then might want to seek revenge. And then the question is, when will it end? So throughout the ages, you have kings who are kind of getting revenge because of what's happened to their family, their monarchy in the past. And then you get other kings wanting revenge as well. So it all becomes quite complex in the way that the film unfolds and explores that. But they do it in quite a clever way. Then, of course, you've got the church, and the church wants its own protection because they have lots of land and they have lots of control and power themselves. So you've got that kind of three-way strand of power. You've got the free folk, you've got the church, and you've got the monarchy. And they all want control. They all want control and power and basically control of their own destinies. So the God and religion comes in. Then you've got the loyalty factor. Which loyalty, which side are you going to be on? And if you're on one side and that starts losing, do you just jump ship and go onto the other side just because it benefits you, as opposed to you sticking to your principles? So it looks at that as well. It looks at loyalty and commitment to a cause. The other thing that struck me with this film, it is quite a survival film, because basically what happens is, the tagline is defend the castle, kill the king, and save the nation. And what happens is there's a strategic castle in Rochester. That means that if the rebels can gain control of this castle, then they can cut the king's food supply and armour supply to the rest of his army throughout the land, and therefore it's quite a strategic point. And so the film does then centre on the rebels being in this castle and defending this castle to prevent the king from getting his supplies out. And so it becomes a film and a story of survival. You're in a castle. You're going to start, if it's under siege, you're going to start running out of food. So what do? Do you start then killing the animals, your horses that you might need, to ride? They're not really food, but it becomes that attrition, that survival kicks in. And it depicts that in a really brutal way. And when they go through some medieval cities as well, it shows they did a really good way of describing and what it was like back then, just the harsh realities of it. The costumes look really good. They're dirty. They look grubby. It doesn't look like they're on a film set. The production values are really, really good in this. And as I say, this because it is CGI, a lot of it's CGI. They've done a really good job in recreating these castles. So it's good CGI that serves the story as opposed to being the main aspect of the film. All the lighting's brilliant. The cinema, there's some beautiful shots of the landscape and the castles, and just kind of captures quite a brutal England that really does kind of you feel like you're actually there. You do feel like you're transported back to the medieval times. And quite frankly, I don't think I'd like to be there. It's all nice, to have that image of, isn't it cool? We got all these castles and dragons, not dragons, but that'd be nice, the medieval kind of culture. But I tell you what, if you don't have money, you will be in Sturm, because it looked a really brutal life. The plot and the characters, it's basically the Magnificent Seven. If you've seen that film, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's one main rebel who then goes to get a team, his gang, if you like, and he goes to different various cities to collect his gang. They owe him favours, or they just want to fight. Money is the main motivation for them. And they're all good. They're good, solid actors that play each role. But unfortunately for me, I didn't really connect to any of them, and I don't quite know what that is. The closest I came to is there's a squire, and he's never had battle before, but he wants to. He wants to help save his nation. And so I guess that's where the audience eyes come into it, because I personally have never seen battle either. And so you're kind of curious about that, about how you would go about it. So if you had to start defending your country and killing, how would you feel about that? Is it as glamorous as you kind of think it is? Well, the short answer is no, it's quite brutal. And that, again, is another theme that they run through about defending, your principles and your honour and the nation. You don't necessarily do it for yourself, you do it for your fellow person, your fellow, countryman and countrywoman. But even then, doing it for that isn't necessarily noble. So again, I like the fact that they look into that. As I say, the production values are really, really good. The CGI, it was all filmed in Wales, apparently, and not in Rochester. And I think that's where I got confused. I thought my friend said that it was filmed in Rochester at the castle. And I've gone to see this castle in Rochester, and it is a ruin at the moment. Well, I don't know if they're going to rebuild it. Obviously not. It's a castle. But it's really cool. You can still walk about it, and it's really, really... And so to see it as it's meant to be, because obviously the CGI, they've recreated it, it did a really good job of how you would actually, live in a castle as well, because there's a baron that also lives there as well. So it's his home. So it gives you a good feel of what life in a castle really was. So I think they did a really good job on that. The fantasy elements, well, there aren't any, basically. And I've said before, I like to look at medieval drama, not just fantasy, because a lot of fantasy that I like is based in the medieval kind of period. It has that feel to it. So if you're into fantasy, and I like writing fantasy as well, obviously it's good to soak up all this sort of atmosphere. But, a dragon, wouldn't have gone amiss really, would it? But it isn't Game of Thrones, obviously. Overall, I'll say it again, if you like violence and you like blood and guts and gore and basically seeing all of that, they don't really leave anything to your imagination, then this is the film for you, because it's there, it's got all of that. And what surprised me is that it's a more intelligent film than I thought it was going to be. And I think that's because of the title, Ironclad. It sounds very kind of brutal, and I just thought it was going to be an out-and-out kind of battling warriors fighting each other and just a lot of hacking and slashing, which is fine up to a point, but that can get a bit boring. This didn't. This did try to have subject matter in there. It did try to put themes in there, and it did try to make the characters realistic and more 3D. For me, though, I didn't quite connect on there, but it is a cut above a lot of other fantasy films or medieval films that are just action films, if you know what I mean. There was a bit more substance to it, and they did question a lot of themes, which I really, really liked. What else have we got here? I was going to say also the history. That was it, the history. I thought they did a good job of sticking to the truth, but having done research for this review, they didn't. They kind of monkeyed about a little bit with it. They stuck to it more than, say, other films have done, but there were a few changes that they made to kind of fit in with the have and I guess that's kind of fair enough. But what it did do, it really did inspire me to then look at the history, because I didn't know too much about the Magna Carta. I've got vague memories of learning about it at school, but I kind of forgotten a lot of it. So it was nice to read up about it and really, understand that the Magna Carta and that, if we didn't have these rebels, then I don't know how far down the democracy line we would have got. It really, so from this point of view, it did inspire me enough to actually do some research on the Magna Carta and read up about that, and to read up on the monarchy and how, at that point they still thought that they weren't connected to God in a sort of I'm God type situation that later kings did and developed. They still thought they were mortals, but they did believe that they had God's blessing and they had the divine right to rule. So all of that I found really, really fascinating. I would recommend you watching this because it is a good, solid film. It's not an excellent film, but I tell you what, it's a good cut above an average sort of action-packed not thriller, but like an action-packed, fast-paced film, because it does put in more than that. It does actually try to be intelligent and have, quite a good amount of themes that really do make you stop and think. So Ironclad, yeah, that gets 2 big swords up for me, not thumbs, because they'll probably get chopped off. It's that gory. Ironclad. Yes, it is brutal, it is gory, but they've packed a lot into this. I was most impressed. It's not a brilliant film, like I say, but I would recommend watching it. Thank you so much for watching our review. You can leave comments as per usual. Let me know if you've seen the film, or if you haven't and you do watch it, let me know what your thoughts are. You can check us out on most media, social media. We have a website, thebottledimp.com, and we do have a new weekly show called The Fantasy News Show. It comes out every Wednesday, and that is where you can get your weekly fix of fantasy. Until then, remember, keep it unreal.